Welcome to the Dynamics of Everyday Life, where we demystify some tricky concepts and get to know ourselves a little bit better. Welcome back to the Dynamics of Everyday Life. And at the time of producing this episode, it's the first week of 2025. So if you're listening as it gets released into the world, then Happy New Year too. If you're binge listening, having only just discovered the show, then that's going to sound a bit odd. So in that case, I hope you've had a wonderful year so far. I've had a couple of weeks off the podcast over the festive break. I really did consider putting some episodes out during the holidays, but then I decided against it. Mainly, to be honest, I was too tired. And as an aside, who on earth decided to call this time of year the holidays? I've honestly no idea who finds it a break. I used to think it was just people who had children who were exhausted. And then recently I've come to realise that absolutely everybody is. Retail workers, hospitality workers, healthcare workers, you name it, everyone is tired. So I did what I encourage all my clients to do, and I took a break. And now we're back. There's going to be no new year, new me, because there is no new me. It reminds me of an A1 song. A1 were a relatively popular boy band back in the 90s. If you don't remember them, I'm not really surprised. But they did a song called The Same Old Brand New You, one of my particular favourites. So it really reminds me of that. And what we're talking about here is some things are going to be the same and some things are going to be different. There's a reason why most New Year's resolutions fail. And that's because we just aren't built this way. Where we work best is where we have small incremental bits of change in our lives and we can then incorporate those and build on them. And there's nothing more guaranteed to make you feel a bit miserable and almost a bit like a failure than a stack of unmet New Year's resolutions come the end of January. Nobody needs that. We really don't need to feel like we've failed before we've even started the year. But before we plunge headlong into moving forward with this year, let's have a think about the last few weeks, as there's a lot of learning at our fingertips. It can be tempting to rush straight into our plans for the new year, particularly as we see everywhere on social media, the whole new year, new me, or things I've left behind in 2024 and what I'm going to be doing this year. But let's review anything that might have happened over the festive period, which we can benefit from. There's going to be loads of learning there. Let's not lose it. First of all, how did you feel when you turned on the out of office for Christmas? Be really honest with yourself here. Were you exhausted and glad to see the back of work for a few days? You know, that time when you've literally been hanging on by the tips of your fingers. Were you tired and relieved that you were getting a holiday, but realistically knew that you'd be pleased to be getting back to it? Were you excited about what was to come over the next few days, counting down with the enthusiasm of a small child? Or were you dreading what was going to happen? And is this a pattern that happens every year? Now, I'm not taking you back to be mean. I think there's some really useful data here. It can be tempting to not think about anything that happened over the holiday period, dismiss it even. But I honestly think that's a bit of a waste. You want a new you in 2025? Well, that's only going to come about if you start to think about what the old you was doing before and how that's really been working for you. How do we need to address our thinking? What aren't we looking at? Or another way to think about it is, what are we just accepting as the way that it is? It won't come as any surprise to any long-time listeners of the show that we've got some defence mechanisms at play. For those of you that got your defence mechanism bingo cards, time to get them out. First of all, we've got denial. So denial is where we really cannot admit something to be true, even though there is a stack of overwhelming evidence to say that it is. There's something there that actually proves that there's truth there, but we will actively deny it. And it's a lot easier to deny that something was difficult over Christmas than to accept it and to work on ways that we can make a change. Remember, our minds don't want us to change. Our brain's job is to keep us alive, so it's going to work hard to keep us doing the same thing over and over again because we understand what that looks like for us. We deny that there's a problem or that there are problems in particular situations. And it's a lot easier to do this with a bit of distance. So once the decorations have gone down and been shoved away in the loft, we can easily push our feelings the same way too. However, all kinds of things can be going on in the unconscious whilst we're pushing things in there, which can change things around a bit. When you get the feelings out again, when we go that full 12-month circle or we end up in similar situations, things might have changed. We might be looking at a different situation. So I've got a fairly relevant example here, case in point. When we put our decorations away, we discovered that we actually have a dead rodent in a loft. Pretty nasty smell up there, and then we realised when we opened the loft door, that's a dead rodent. If we don't do something about this, it's got the potential to impact everything that we've got stored in there. Now, personally, I like to think that it's part of a family of squirrels and the deceased one had a long and happy life, breathing his final moments on one of our hot water pipes. You can tell I've got a bit of a Disney-fied version of what's gone on in our loft. However, I suspect it's possibly more Roland Rat than Tufty the Squirrel. And whatever actually ends up being there, we need to sort it out. If we deny it, it's only going to get worse. And I don't just mean the smell. It's brought out a whole new meaning to the phrase of, I smell a rat, because I actually know what a rat smells like now. Anyway, I digress. We can also get caught up in behaviours that keep us from looking at what is actually going on for us. And Christmas is a brilliant time for this. There's overeating, there's over-drinking, there's overspending. And one of the reasons that we do this at this time of year is that we want to get difficult feelings, difficult thoughts, we want to keep them at bay. If you think about it, a bit of sales shopping or a bit of binging on the mince pies can divert our minds no end. We've also got projection. Now this is where we decide that all the problems belong to somebody else. So you get everyone together over a couple of days, particularly people that you don't normally spend time with, and it becomes very easy to allocate the troubles of the world to somebody else. This one can be quite hard to see in ourselves. And one way to think about this is if you're deciding that it's always somebody else's fault, then you might be projecting. You might not, but it's worth considering. And then we've got a big favourite over the festive period. We've got regression. Regression is where we go back to an earlier stage of development so that we don't need to cope with the world the way that it is now. If you see me around tax return time, I definitely regress. I don't want to do it. So I behave as if I'm incapable, which just isn't true. I'm more than capable of doing it, just really don't want to. And here we can see projection too. So one of my shortcomings is that I'm not keen on women in public life who are clearly very intelligent, who I think are dumbing themselves down. Now, I'm not going to mention any names, just in case they turn out to be huge fans of the show. Bit of wishful thinking on my part. I know my mother will know exactly who I'm meaning here. And what's happening here is this is a part of myself that I don't like very much, the bit about dumbing myself down, and I project it onto other people. So I don't possibly give myself a hard time for behaving like a teenager when it comes to doing my tax return, but I will when I see it in other people. That's projection. Anyway, back to regression. It's very easy to regress when we return to well-worn dynamics. Remember, our brain likes routine and what it knows. So if you return to a family dynamic that you last spent a lot of time in during your teenage years, guess what? That's where you're likely to regress to. Thrown in with people responding to you in that way. It becomes a pressure cooker of old dynamics. The big challenge here can be remembering that you're not 16, you're actually 45 and know full well how to roast potatoes. But if you can manage this, then you'll feel better by staying in who you are in this moment. My invitation for you this week is for you to consider how it was for you over the last few weeks. Were you stressed beyond belief and ended up relying on your defence mechanisms to get you through? Are you now telling yourself, new year, new me, without actually thinking about what you might want to change? What wasn't working for you? And as always, Give yourself some grace. It can be tempting to be relieved to get through to the other side of the holiday period without giving the last few weeks a second thought. We might be wanting to look forward, leaving everything behind us in the remnants of 2024. And whilst I am all for looking forward, let's not leave anything useful behind. Looking at ourselves at this level can be challenging and unnerving as we develop our awareness, so I'd always encourage that you do this at your own speed. If you feel you need some extra help around this, then I've put together a PDF resource sheet and you can find the link for this in the show notes. If you'd like to have a chat with me about psychodynamics or whether I'm the right coach, supervisor or mentor for you, then click on the link that's also in the show notes. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Dynamics of Everyday Life. Please hit the follow button for future episodes and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow me on Instagram at The Dynamics of Everyday Life or find me on LinkedIn at Julia Rogers. I'd love to hear from you and hear your thoughts on dynamics. The Dynamics of Everyday Life is brought to you by Coaching 42 and the fabulous team at the Podcast Boutique.